Today you're going to learn all about sewing with rib knits, one of my absolute favorite fabrics. Rib knits are quick to sew, they look professional, and they're really comfy to wear. I'll show you the different types, how to buy them, and tips for cutting and sewing, plus some of my favorite examples and projects to inspire you. Okay, so what is rib knit? Rib knit is characterized by its vertical ribbed texture. It's a knit fabric, and the ribs are created by alternating knit and purl stitches. These ribs are what make rib knits extra stretchy with really good recovery. Rib knits are super popular for cuffs and for collars because of their ability to stretch but then return to shape. So that's what recovery means. Personally, I love to sew rib knit to sew an entire garment. These knits are just so soft, they're so stretchy, and they're just so comfortable to wear. So let's talk about the different types of rib knit. So there are several types of rib knits that you're gonna come across when you're shopping. So let me break them down with some examples. So first I wanna talk about the actual ribs in rib knits. They look kind of similar to the wales that you find in corduroy, so those columns. You can find thick or thin ribs, and they can look really different. So let's take a look at a 1x1 rib knit. So that's one knit stitch followed by one purl stitch, and let's see how that looks. You can easily see the ribs on this chunky example here. So you can see there's a little kind of V shape here, and that's your knit stitch. And then this little deep groove in between those V's, that's your purl stitch. So this sweater knit is made with a really chunky yarn, so it makes it very easy to see those ribs. You can even count the ribs, so you can see pretty easily that this is one knit, one purl, one knit, one purl. So you know this is a 1x1 rib knit. But rib knits also come in a very fine weight, so this is made with a very fine yarn. And with a finer fabric like this, it's a little bit harder to see that 1x1 pattern than with the chunkier knit. So these 1x1 rib knits are really ideal for stretchy projects because they just have a lot of stretch and a lot of give. The 1x1 pattern of the stitches makes it the most dense of all the rib knits. That makes it a great choice for cuffs, for waistbands, and for neckbands where you need a lot of stretch. Because of that really dense and stretchy texture, it makes it a really good choice for form-fitting garments. So you can make a really beautiful stretchy top out of this, or for the sweater knit, you can make a really nice sweater dress that kind of fits your body. All right, so we've talked about a 1x1 rib knit, so that's knit, purl, but you can also find a 2x2 rib knit or a 3x3 rib knit. So a 2x2 would be knit, purl. A 3x3 would be knit, purl, and so on. So you could have knit, purl. So any of those other rib knits, so a 2x2 or a 3x3 as opposed to a 1x1, the ribs are just going to be a little bit wider. So you'll notice that the rib looks a little bit wider, and if it's, for example, a 3x3, that gutter between them will be a little bit wider. And so that affects the way it looks. It also affects the performance a little bit. So it'll be a little bit less stretchy than a 1x1, but it'll still be very stretchy and still have a lot of recovery. And that's just the great thing about rib knits. You can also find variegated rib knits. So with that, you can find like a 3x2 or a 4x5, and that just mixes up the width of the ribs in the fabric. So it gives it this really cool look. So you can see it kind of gives it this cool stripy pattern that just gives it a little bit more visual interest. All right, so far we've talked about your typical rib knits that you'll find, but I also wanted to mention horizontal rib knits. So you'll sometimes find horizontal rib knits online or at the fabric store, and it's different from what we were just talking about. Horizontal rib knits are actually created by doing a line of knit, and then a line of purl, and then a line of knit, and then a line of purl. And one of the differences you'll find, other than the way it looks, because you have horizontal lines instead of vertical lines, obviously, is that you don't get that amazing stretch and recovery. And that's because the stretch is created by those gutters in between the knit stitches. So those purl stitches allow it to stretch extra. You don't have that when you're doing a whole line of knit and then a whole line of purl. So you'll find that these fabrics are a little bit less stretchy, but they do have a lot of structure and they still do look really nice. I also want to mention ribbing in particular. Ribbing is a specific type of rib knit that's often found at the edges of garments like cuffs and waistbands. Let's take a look at the Lex sweatshirt, for example. So this has ribbing on the cuffs, the neckband, the waistband, and the edges of the pockets too. It's a really cool way to add a textural accent to your garment. So we've talked about how rib knits have a lot of structure and they have a lot of good recovery. So that's what makes it so great for these details, because you can imagine if you were to sew a knit sweatshirt like this and you were just to fold under this edge at the bottom, this hem, and stitch it, you can imagine that it could get stretched out over time. So adding a rib knit at the bottom prevents that because it'll return to its original shape. And that way you don't get it bagging out at the neckline, you don't get bagging out at the hem, and in this case you don't get bagging out at the pockets where the hands are going in and out a lot. You'll often find ribbing sold in tubes or sometimes in pre-made cuffs, which is really, really handy. And often those fabrics that are sold specifically as ribbing are often really dense and have a really, really nice structure to them that makes them perfect for this particular application. All right, now that you've seen how rib knits look and how they function, let's talk about their fiber content. So rib knits, like a lot of knits, can be made from a lot of different fibers. Some common fiber contents that you'll find rib knit in are cotton. So if you're looking for a mostly natural fiber, you can look for cotton rib knits, and you'll also find organic cotton rib knits very often. Cotton rib knits are soft, they're breathable, and they're really, really comfortable. That makes them great for comfy kind of everyday garments like t-shirts or loungewear. You'll also often find polyester blended in rib knits. This makes the fabric more durable and it also prevents wrinkles. It can also help the fabric retain its shape, because you might find that cotton rib knits can sometimes bag a little bit with wear. You can also find wool rib knits, which are a total treat to wear, especially merino wool. It's very, very yummy. They're warm, they're durable, and they're just really, really cozy. They're also a great option if you're looking for a natural fiber that wicks moisture, which makes it great for athletic wear. It's also perfect for cold weather garments like sweaters or scarves. You can also find rayon rib knits, so these are known for being very soft and they have a really, really nice drape to them. They're great for garments that have a lot of flow and a lot of movement to them, so they're great for dresses or flowy pants or flowy tops. If you're looking for an extra soft rib knit, look for bamboo because they're really, really soft and really, really comfy to wear. They also have some moisture wicking properties, so it makes them a really popular choice for activewear and also for baby clothes. All right, now that we've talked about the fabric, let's talk about a couple of things to know before you sew with rib knits. So I have a couple of tips for you. So first, make sure you're using the right tools. Since rib knits are knits, you're gonna wanna use a ballpoint needle that's the right weight for the fabric you're using. A walking foot can also help prevent the fabric from stretching while you're sewing. You might also want to have some clear elastic on hand, which will help stabilize certain areas with drapey rib knits. It's especially good for inserting into seams at shoulders and other areas where your fabric is likely to stretch out. And finally, don't forget to pre-wash your fabric, because unless they have a lot of polyester in them, they can shrink. Now I want to talk about cutting out our rib knits. When it comes to cutting rib knits, precision is key. The fabric is stretchy and that always makes things a little bit tricky, so use sharp scissors or you can use a rotary cutter. I definitely prefer to use a rotary cutter and then use plenty of pattern weights. This makes it easier to keep everything in place while you're cutting, and I think it's a lot easier than tracing everything with chalk and then cutting it out with shears. It also really helps with preventing any unwanted stretching or distortion. And I have one other tip for cutting, which is that if it's possible, cut your pattern pieces flat rather than on the fold. It can be hard to see if the ribs are slightly askew if you can't see everything while you're cutting it. Now I want to talk about sewing with rib knits, and I have a few tips that are going to help you. First, use a zigzag or a stretch stitch, and that'll allow the seams to stretch with the fabric. If you're using a serger, even better, it's going to give your seams a really professional finish. By the way, if you're new to sergers, you should definitely check out our serger course, so I'll put a link to that below. I also recommend sewing a test swatch. Then you can adjust your stitch length and that'll prevent the fabric from bunching or warping. And like I mentioned before, if your fabric is really stretchy or it's really heavy, you can stabilize certain areas like shoulders by sewing in some clear elastic. And to do that, all you do is sew it into the seam allowance without stretching it out. And that just prevents it from losing its shape over time. And when I'm sewing hems on really stretchy fabric like this, I like to use Wonder Tape instead of pins because it really just holds everything in place so things don't get askew or stretched out. And finally, take your time when you're sewing rib knits. This is especially important when you're sewing long seams like side seams or sleeves. If you make sure that your fabric isn't stretching or sagging while you sew, your garment's just gonna look so much better when you're done. And if you do get snags, first thing to do is check your needle. Make sure it's a fresh ballpoint needle. If there are any snags or any sharp edges to it, you should definitely replace it. If you find that your fabric's getting stretched out while you're sewing, again, you can try using a walking foot instead of a regular foot, and try lowering the pressure of your presser foot, and that'll help the fabric to feed through a little bit more smoothly. And now I want to talk about some of my favorite ideas for sewing with rib knits. Now that you know how to shop for and sew with rib knit fabric, I'm going to show you some of my favorite project ideas. Let's start with a fitted turtleneck. I think this is perfect for cooler weather and it looks really stylish in rib knit. I've made the Lenny dress a few times actually, and this is in a striped rib knit. So this is, I believe it's a 4x2 rib knit, and it's not quite as stretchy as, for example, a 1x1 rib knit, but it's still got plenty of stretch for a dress like this. And I've got a project video that I'm gonna link to below if you wanna see more of this dress. I love this dress so much. I mean, I just love turtlenecks, so I cropped it into a shirt. So I got this fabric actually in a swap, so I'm not really sure what it's made out of, but I think it is another 4x2 rib knit and is really soft and lovely. Another option if you want to sew a bodycon dress but you want something without sleeves is the Edie. So this pattern is actually a top, but you could really easily lengthen it into a dress like this. And if you're a Seamwork member, you can download the bonus version of Edie, which is a dress like this with a slit in the back. Since form-fitting garments look really great in rib knit, I also recommend using them for a fitted tee. So for example, I made the Goldie tee in rib knit, and it's a total wardrobe staple for me. This pattern actually only took me 2 hours, and I have a project video all about it, so I'm gonna link that below. So this fabric, it's really cute, but it has quite a bit of polyester in it, so that gives it really good recovery, but it does make it a little bit sweaty. So next time I think I would make this in a cotton or a natural fiber. Another project idea for rib knits is loungewear. Any loungewear that's made for knits will probably work great in a rib knit because it's just so stretchy and so comfortable. These are the Nash flared leggings, for example. We sewed these up in this really beautiful rib knit, and they even have pockets. And if you don't want to use ribbing for an entire garment, you can also use it just on the cuffs and waistband, like on this Oliver. So for this Oliver sweatshirt that I sewed, I used French terry for the main fabric, and then I used ribbing for the waistband and the cuffs. And the final example that I wanted to share with you is the Mel joggers. So these are also sewn in French terry, and we have ribbing here on the cuffs and on the waistband. I just think that using ribbing in your activewear on places like waistband and cuffs just gives it a really, really professional look. And remember, ribbing creates great bindings and bands because it's so stretchy and it prevents your fabric from bagging out. So I recommend always keeping some on hand. And if there's one thing that you can do to dramatically improve your success rate with all the clothes you make, it's learn about fabric. And there's another type of fabric that I sew with all the time, and I'll tell you about it in this next video. If you like to make dresses or soft blouses, it's a must watch.